The sky above the alien world was dark with smoke. Once the valley had been full of green trees and shining water, but now it was black with fire and ash. Villages had burned, houses were broken, families had run into the hills chased by raiders who had come from the stars with weapons of heat and flame. Among the frightened people was Lyra, a young alien mother holding the hand of her daughter Mira. Lyra's people were peaceful. They were farmers and singers, not fighters. Their skin was pale blue, their eyes large and bright like pools of light. Their voices were soft and their hearts were gentle. But gentle hearts could not stop men with guns. Lyra pulled Mira through the ruins of the village. The girl was small, only 8 years old, and she was crying, her bare feet stumbling on the broken ground. "Run, my child," Lyra whispered, though her own legs were weak. "Do not stop. The shadows are behind us." From the smoke came the sound of laughter, cruel, sharp, echoing like metal against stone. Raiders. Their boots hit the ground like drums of war. Lyra's chest ached with fear. She could not fight them. Her husband had been taken months ago, lost to the same war. She had no weapons, no power, only her arms to hold her daughter, only her courage to guide her steps. She prayed to the stars for help, though no help had ever come. But that night the stars answered. At the edge of the valley stood a man not of her world. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in battered armor that had once been bright but now carried scars of battles past. A human warrior, a soldier from Earth. His name was Daniel Ward, though few called him that anymore. Among those who had seen him fight, he was known only as the Iron Stranger. Daniel had been stranded on this alien world after a space battle gone wrong. His ship had fallen, his crew gone. For months he had survived alone, moving through the forests and deserts, avoiding the raiders who now ruled the skies. His rifle was old, his blade worn, but his will was stronger than steel. He saw the mother and child fleeing through the burning ruins. He saw the raiders chasing them, laughing as if it were a game. Something in him stirred, an old memory of Earth, of children laughing in green fields, of families safe under the sun. He could not turn away. The raiders closed in on Lyra and Mira. One shouted in a tongue full of hate, raising his gun. The barrel glowed, ready to fire. Mira screamed, clutching her mother's arm. Lyra wrapped her daughter tight, waiting for the end. Then from the smoke came a roar. Bang! The sound was loud and terrible. The first raider fell, his weapon slipping from his hands. The others spun in shock. From the shadows stepped Daniel, his rifle blazing, his eyes hard as iron. "Get down!" he shouted, though Lyra did not understand his words. His voice carried the tone of command, and she obeyed, pulling Mira to the ground. Daniel moved like a storm. He fired, ducked, rolled across the broken stones. Bullets flashed, smoke rose, and raiders screamed. They had numbers, but he had skill. He was faster, sharper, relentless. One raider tried to strike him with a blade, but Daniel caught the arm, twisted, and broke it in a single motion. Another came from behind, but Daniel spun, striking with his rifle's butt, knocking the man flat. Within moments, the ground was silent except for the crackle of fire. The raiders lay defeated. Some fled back into the smoke, too afraid to face him. Daniel stood breathing hard, the heat of battle still in his veins. His armor was scratched, his face lined with dust and scars. But his eyes, when they turned to the mother and child, were not cruel. They were kind. Lyra trembled, clutching Mira. She did not know this warrior. His skin was strange, his voice deep and foreign. She had never seen his kind before, yet he had saved them when no one else would. Mira peered at him with wide eyes, whispering, "Mama, is he a spirit? Did the stars send him?" Lyra did not answer. She did not know. Daniel lowered his rifle and slowly raised one hand, palm open, showing he meant no harm. He spoke again, softer this time. She could not understand the words, but his tone was clear. "You are safe now." For a long moment, the three of them stood in the glow of fire, silent but bound by something deeper than language. The night grew colder as the fires died down. Daniel looked at the mother and daughter. He knew they could not survive alone. The raiders would come again. He could leave them, focus only on his own survival. But his heart would not allow it. He stepped forward, pointing toward the hills. His gesture was firm, clear. "Follow me." Lyra hesitated. She had always taught her daughter never to trust strangers. Yet what choice did they have? The raiders were still hunting, and the forest was wide and cruel. She looked at Daniel at the strange light in his eyes, not the fire of anger, but the fire of protection. Then she nodded. Taking Mira's hand, she rose, and together they followed the human warrior into the dark. The journey was not easy. They climbed through rocky hills, crossed streams under the pale light of moons, and hid from patrols that passed like shadows. Mira grew tired, her legs trembling. More than once, Daniel lifted her into his arms, carrying her as if she weighed nothing. The girl rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. It was strong, steady, like the steps of a giant. She whispered, "Mama, he is not a spirit. He is real." And in that moment, Daniel smiled, just a little. At dawn, they reached a small cave hidden among cliffs. It was simple but safe. Daniel had used it before as a shelter. He lit a small fire, set down Mira, and offered them food from his pack. The food was strange to Lyra, dry and heavy, but hunger made it welcome. Mira ate quickly, glancing at Daniel as if he were a hero from a story. Lyra studied him in silence. His armor was scratched but strong. His hands were rough with scars. His face carried lines of pain, yet his eyes were watchful, careful, never leaving them unguarded. She wondered, why does he fight for us? He owes us nothing, yet he risks his life. When their eyes met, Daniel gave a short nod as if to say, "You are safe. I will not let harm come." For the first time in many months, Lyra felt hope, but hope was fragile. Outside the cave, the land still burned. The raiders still hunted. War had not ended, yet something new had begun. A human warrior, lost and alone. An alien mother, frightened but brave. A child clinging to the dream of safety. Their paths had crossed by chance, but perhaps not by accident. For in the dark of war, sometimes the stars send not angels, but men. The cave was silent except for the soft crackle of fire. Smoke drifted slowly upward, escaping through cracks in the stone roof. Outside, the wind howled across the valley, carrying the distant cries of raiders searching the ruins below. Inside, 3 figures sat close to the warmth. The human warrior, Daniel, leaned against the wall, his rifle within reach. His eyes stayed sharp, scanning the cave mouth as if danger might step through at any moment. Across from him sat Lyra, the alien mother, holding her daughter Mira close. The child had fallen asleep at last, her head resting against her mother's lap. Her breathing was slow and calm, a small comfort after hours of fear. But Lyra herself could not rest. She watched the human carefully, her thoughts restless. He was unlike anyone she had ever known. His skin was pale, his hair dark, his voice deep and strange. His movements were strong and precise, his strength frightening. Yet when Mira had stumbled earlier, he had carried her gently. He had saved them from death. Yet she still wondered why. Daniel could feel her eyes on him. He did not blame her for her doubt. He knew how he must look to her. A stranger with weapons, a man who fought like a beast, a face hardened by too many battles. But he also saw her fear. It was not just for herself, it was for her daughter. That he respected. In every world he had traveled, mothers were the same. They would give everything to keep their children safe. When Mira stirred in her sleep, Daniel finally spoke. His words were slow, steady, though he knew she could not understand his language. "You don't have to fear me," he said quietly. "I'm not your enemy." Lyra tilted her head. The words meant nothing, but the tone, low and calm, was clear. Her body eased, if only a little. Morning came. Pale sunlight slipped through the cave mouth, touching Mira's face. The child yawned and blinked awake. When her eyes found Daniel sitting nearby, her lips curved into a small smile. "Strong one," she whispered in her own tongue. She sat up and crawled toward him. Fearless now, she touched the strange armor on his chest, knocking lightly as if testing if it was stone or metal. Daniel raised his brows but allowed it. The girl's laugh filled the cave like music after a storm. Lyra watched, her heart tight with both relief and worry. Children trusted too easily. Yet as she saw the way Daniel bent his head slightly, letting Mira trace the scars on his arm without pushing her away, something softened in her chest. Perhaps he truly meant no harm. They set out again that day. Daniel led the way, his steps steady, his eyes scanning the trees. Lyra and Mira followed closely behind. The forest stretched wide and deep. Shafts of light broke through the tall branches, and the ground was covered in thick moss. Birds with shining wings darted between trunks, their cries sharp and strange. For a moment it seemed peaceful, but Daniel never lowered his guard. Every crack of a branch made him tense. Every shadow made his hand drift toward his rifle. Mira skipped forward, humming softly, her small hand reaching for Daniel's. He looked down, surprised, but did not pull away. The child's trust was unshakable. Lyra's heart ached at the sight. Her daughter had not smiled so freely in many months. She had not sung since the day her father was taken. And yet now, beside this strange human, she laughed as if the world were safe again. By midday, they stopped near a stream. The water sparkled as it rushed between smooth stones. Daniel crouched and filled a small metal flask, then offered it to Lyra. She hesitated. To drink what a stranger gave was dangerous. Yet the clear stream water glimmered and thirst burned her throat. She accepted carefully, sipping before handing it to Mira. Daniel watched them drink, then broke a small packet of dried food from his pack. It was tough, tasteless by his standards, but it was all he had. Mira wrinkled her nose at first bite but ate quickly, her hunger too strong. Lyra whispered thanks in her language, pressing her hand briefly to her chest. Daniel did not understand the words, but he nodded. The meaning was clear enough. Later, as they walked, danger returned. A raider patrol appeared in the distance, 3 men scanning the forest with weapons ready. Daniel saw them first. He motioned sharply for Lyra and Mira to hide behind a fallen tree. They obeyed at once, hearts pounding. Mira clung to her mother, eyes wide. Daniel lay flat in the grass, waiting. The raiders came closer, their boots crunching leaves, their voices rough. His hand gripped the rifle. He could fire, but if he did, more might come. Instead, he waited until they passed, silent as a shadow. Only when the last sound faded did he rise, motioning the mother and daughter forward again. Lyra's breath shook with relief. She looked at him differently now, not just as a fighter who killed, but as a protector who knew when to shield. That evening, they reached another shelter, a half-ruined stone hut left behind by villagers who had fled. The walls still stood, though the roof was broken. Daniel checked every corner before letting them inside. Mira ran about, exploring as if it were a palace. She laughed when she found a piece of broken pottery, holding it like treasure. Lyra knelt by the fire. Daniel started, her eyes watching the flames. For the first time, she spoke softly in her own tongue, not to him but to herself. "Why do you help us, human? You owe us nothing. Yet my daughter smiles again because of you." Daniel could not understand, but something in her tone reached him. He gave a short, quiet answer anyway. Because no child deserves to cry, night came. The stars burned bright in the black sky. From the doorway, Mira pointed upward, naming the constellations her father once showed her. Lyra listened, her heart breaking at the memory. Daniel sat nearby, polishing his rifle. His eyes lifted to the same stars. He thought of Earth, of the sky he had not seen in years, of the family he had lost long ago. For a moment he felt the weight of loneliness. But when he glanced at the child's smiling face and the mother's quiet strength, the weight eased. Perhaps he was not as alone as he thought. The days that followed were hard. They traveled through forests and hills, always avoiding raiders. Food was scarce, sleep was short, but slowly a rhythm formed. Daniel hunted small animals and shared the meat. Lyra found edible roots and herbs to add to meals. Mira carried water and collected wood, eager to help. At night they sat together, firelight flickering across their faces. Mira told stories in her own language, making gestures so Daniel could follow. He pretended not to understand, then acted surprised at the ending, which made her giggle. Even Lyra laughed sometimes, though her eyes always held caution. She had lost too much to trust fully, yet with each passing day her fear lessened. She saw how he watched over Mira, how he always kept himself between danger and them, how he never once asked for anything in return. Perhaps he was not only a warrior, perhaps he was something more. One night, as Mira slept curled in her blanket, Lyra sat awake, staring at the fire. Daniel sat across, sharpening his blade. The crackle of flames was the only sound. At last she spoke, her voice low and uncertain. "I do not know your words," she said in her language, "but I know your heart." Daniel looked up, sensing her meaning, though not her words. He met her gaze steadily. She placed her hand on her chest, then pointed to Mira, then to him. A gesture as old as time. You protect her. You protect us. Daniel nodded once. No words were needed, and in that quiet, something fragile yet powerful grew. A trust not born of speech, but of action. The road ahead was still long. The raiders still hunted. The war was not yet over. But for the first time, Lyra no longer felt like prey running in the dark. For the first time, Mira laughed freely, her small hand safe in a warrior's grasp. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt he had found something worth more than survival. A family. The sun rose slowly over the forest, painting the trees with gold. The morning was quiet except for the songs of strange birds. A soft mist floated between the branches, making the world seem calm. But calm was rare in this land, and Daniel knew it would not last. Still, for a short time, he allowed himself to breathe. He stood outside the ruined stone hut, sharpening his knife on a flat rock. His armor was dented, his rifle scratched, but his body was steady. Behind him, inside the hut, the sound of soft laughter carried. It was Mira. The girl was awake early, sitting on the floor with a small bundle of sticks. She was trying to build a tiny fort, copying what Daniel had shown her the night before. Her small hands worked clumsily, but her eyes sparkled with joy. Lyra watched from nearby, her face calm but thoughtful. She brushed her daughter's hair gently, her mind torn between fear of tomorrow and gratitude for today. Daniel turned his head slightly at the sound of laughter. He did not smile often, but the corner of his mouth lifted for a moment. He had fought in many wars, seen cities burn, seen comrades fall, yet nothing felt as strong as the simple sound of a child's happiness. They set out again when the sun was higher. The forest thinned, giving way to rolling hills covered in tall grass. The wind moved across the land like waves, and the smell of ash still lingered from burned villages far away. Daniel led them carefully, always keeping watch. Lyra and Mira walked behind him, their shadows stretching long in the light. At midday, they stopped near a patch of stones where water pooled in a shallow spring. Daniel crouched, checking the ground for tracks. He found none. Safe for now. He showed Mira how to cup her hands to drink. The girl giggled when the cold water slipped between her fingers. Daniel shook his head but showed her again, slower this time. She copied carefully, and soon she was drinking without spilling. "Mama, look," Mira cried in her own tongue, showing her hands full of water. Lyra's lips curved into a small smile. She looked at Daniel, and though no words passed between them, her eyes said it clearly. "Thank you for teaching her." That night they built a small camp at the edge of the hills. Daniel gathered wood while Lyra prepared roots she had found earlier. Together, they made a simple stew in a broken clay pot left by villagers. When the meal was ready, they sat close around the fire. Mira ate happily, speaking quickly in her own language, her hands moving as if telling a story. Daniel could not understand, but he watched, nodding as if her words were the most important in the world. The girl's laughter filled the night. When she finally grew tired and curled up to sleep, Lyra stayed awake. She sat across from Daniel, the firelight dancing on her face. For a long time, silence stretched between them. Then she spoke softly, though she knew he would not understand. "You are changing her," she said. "You are giving her hope again. And you are changing me too." Daniel looked at her, tilting his head. He could not know her words, but he felt their weight. His eyes softened, and he gave a short nod. Sometimes trust was not built with language. Sometimes it was built with small acts repeated each day. Days turned into a rhythm. They walked during the mornings, searched for food during the afternoons, and built fires at night. Mira grew stronger. She learned to carry small bundles of sticks without complaint. She learned how to listen for the sound of raider patrols and stay quiet. She even tried to copy Daniel's serious expression. Though it always ended with her giggling, Daniel taught her simple things: how to tie knots with rope, how to sharpen a stick to use as a spear, how to keep balance while walking on rough ground. The girl listened eagerly. Sometimes she stumbled, sometimes she failed, but Daniel never scolded. He only showed her again, patient and calm. Lyra watched all this with wonder. Her daughter had lost her father months ago, and she had thought the child would never feel safe again. Yet now Mira ran beside Daniel, laughing, her small hands holding his without fear. Lyra's heart ached, but also warmed. One evening, as the sun set red behind the hills, danger returned. They were crossing a narrow path between rocks when voices echoed nearby. Raiders again. Daniel raised his hand sharply, signaling silence. Lyra pulled Mira close, hiding behind a boulder. The girl pressed her face against her mother, trembling. Daniel crouched low, his rifle ready. Shadows moved across the ridge above. 3 raiders with long weapons scanning the land. For a tense moment, they seemed to look directly down at the hiding place. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. But then the raiders moved on, their voices fading into the distance. Only when the sound was gone did Daniel lower his rifle. Lyra's breath escaped in a rush. She whispered a prayer under her breath, then looked at Daniel. Her eyes met his, full of silent gratitude. In that moment, she realized something. She trusted him with her life, and more importantly, with her daughter's life. That night they camped in a hollow hidden by tall grass. The stars above were countless, shining like silver dust. Mira fell asleep quickly, her head on her mother's lap. Daniel sat nearby, cleaning his blade. Lyra watched him for a long time, then finally spoke. "You fight as if the world is always at war," she said in her language, "and yet you guard us as if peace is possible." He looked at her, hearing only the music of her voice, not the meaning. Still, her eyes carried the message. She pointed at herself, then at Mira, then at him. Slowly, she pressed her hand to her chest, a gesture of trust. Daniel understood enough. He gave a small nod. His rough hand touched the ground near the fire. Steady as stone. The bond between them grew stronger that night. Though no words were shared, the days that followed felt almost like a new life. They found a small clearing where wild berries grew. Mira ran among the bushes, filling her hands with fruit, her laughter ringing. Daniel carried her on his shoulders, making her squeal with delight. Lyra's heart filled with warmth at the sight. Later, Daniel built a small shelter of branches and stone, teaching Mira how to help. The child worked hard, proud of every piece she added. When the roof was finished, she clapped her hands and called it our house in her language. Lyra stood nearby, her eyes soft. For the first time in many months, she felt not just safe, but almost at home. But home was fragile in a land of war. One night, while they sat by the fire, the distant glow of raider ships lit the horizon. The sound of engines rumbled across the hills. Daniel rose instantly, scanning the sky. His face hardened. The danger was closer than ever. Lyra's heart sank, but when she looked at him, she felt strength. He was their shield. She no longer doubted that. Mira stirred in her sleep, whispering, "Daddy," in her own tongue, a word Lyra had not heard from her since her husband's death. Daniel froze for a moment, hearing the unfamiliar sound. He did not understand the word, but he felt its weight. He looked at the child's peaceful face, then at the mother's quiet tears. Without speaking, he sat again, his hand resting near the firelight. He would not let harm come, not to the girl, not to her mother, not while he still breathed. The world around them was broken by war. Raiders hunted, villages burned, and the nights were filled with fear. But in the center of that storm, something new was being built. A bond stronger than fear. A trust stronger than silence. A family, fragile but real, formed not by blood, but by choice. And though Daniel did not yet say it, though Lyra did not yet admit it, both of them knew their lives were no longer separate, they belonged together now. The shelter they had built in the clearing was small but warm. Branches formed the walls, stones held the roof steady, and inside there was space for fire, food, and sleep. To Mira, it was a castle. To Lyra, it was a gift of peace after months of fear. For Daniel, however, it was never enough. He had seen too much war to believe peace could last. He always sharpened his blade, always checked his rifle, always kept his ears open for the sound of raiders. But even a careful man cannot stop fate. One morning, Mira woke laughing. She had dreamed of flying birds with silver wings. She ran outside the shelter barefoot in the grass, calling for Daniel to see the shapes of clouds above. Daniel followed with slow steps, his hand resting on his rifle. Lyra came to, smiling as she watched her daughter's joy. For a moment they looked like any family in a quiet land. Then the sound came, low at first, then louder. Engines. Daniel froze. His soldier's instincts flared. He turned his eyes toward the horizon. Over the distant hills, black ships appeared, gliding like shadows across the sky. Raider patrols. Inside now, Daniel ordered, his voice sharp, though Lyra could not understand. But she understood his tone. She grabbed Mira and pulled her back into the shelter. Daniel scanned the sky. The ships were moving in wide arcs, searching. He cursed under his breath. Somehow their hiding place had been found. By midday, the ships had passed, but Daniel knew the danger was not gone. Raiders always sent scouts. He set traps around the clearing, wires strung between trees, sharpened stakes hidden under leaves. Lyra watched him, helping where she could. She carried stones, gathered branches, did whatever his gestures told her. She did not complain. She knew their lives depended on it. Mira stayed close, her small face serious. She whispered, "Mama, the strong one will protect us, right?" Lyra hugged her tightly. "Yes, my child. He will not let harm come." But inside, Lyra prayed to the stars again. The attack came at dusk. The first sound was a snap, the wire trap catching an enemy's foot. A raider cried out in pain. Then came shouts, heavy boots crashing through the forest. Daniel moved instantly. His rifle fired, sharp and deadly. A raider fell. Another charged, but the hidden stakes pierced his leg. He screamed, collapsing. Lyra pulled Mira into the corner of the shelter, shielding her body with her own. The girl buried her face in her mother's chest, trembling. Daniel fought outside like a storm. He moved from tree to tree, firing, striking, never still. The raiders were many, but his skill was greater. His rifle cracked, his blade flashed, and his fists struck like iron. Still, they kept coming. One raider broke through the traps, running straight toward the shelter. Lyra's heart froze. She had no weapon, nothing but her arms. But then she remembered what Daniel had shown Mira, sharpened sticks. She grabbed one from the firewood pile. Her hands shook, but she stood in front of her daughter, the stick pointed outward. The raider sneered, raising his blade. Lyra thrust forward, the stick striking his shoulder. It was not strong, but it was enough to slow him. Then Daniel appeared, slamming into the raider with the force of a hammer. They struggled, rolling across the ground, fists and knives clashing. Daniel's strength won. The raider fell, silent. Lyra gasped, her hands trembling. Daniel looked at her, his chest heaving. For the first time, she saw not only a warrior but a man fighting for them with everything he had. The battle raged into night. Flames lit the clearing as a raider threw a torch at the shelter. The roof caught fire. Smoke filled the air. Mira screamed, clinging to her mother. Daniel shouted, pulling them out before the roof collapsed. He drove the raiders back with fire from his rifle, but his arm was cut, blood running down. Still, he did not fall. He fought on, his eyes burning with fierce light. Every blow, every shot was not just survival. It was for Lyra, for Mira, for the family he had found in the ashes of war. At last, the last raider fell. The clearing was silent except for the crackle of fire and Daniel's heavy breaths. The shelter was gone, burned to black ruins. The traps were broken. The ground was littered with bodies. Daniel sank to one knee, clutching his wounded arm. His face was pale, his body trembling from exhaustion. Lyra rushed to him, kneeling at his side. She tore a strip of cloth from her dress and pressed it to his wound, her hands steady though her heart raced. Mira knelt too, her small hands touching his armor. Tears filled her eyes. "Don't leave us, strong one, please." Daniel looked at her, then at Lyra, his lips curved in the faintest smile. "Not leaving," he whispered, though they did not know his words, but they understood. The night was long. Lyra tended Daniel's wound as best she could, cleaning it with water, wrapping it tight. Mira stayed close, refusing to sleep, watching him as if afraid he would vanish. When dawn came, Daniel was still alive. Weak, but alive. Lyra sat beside him, her head heavy with exhaustion but her heart full of relief. She looked at the burned ruins of their shelter and then at the man who had saved them again. She whispered in her language, "You are more than a warrior. You are our shield, our strength, our hope." Daniel did not hear. He was asleep, his body finally resting. But Mira did. The girl looked at her mother, then at Daniel and said softly, "Mama, he is our daddy now, isn't he?" Lyra's eyes filled with tears. She pulled her daughter close, kissing her hair. "Yes, my child. Perhaps the stars sent him to us for that reason. The battle had taken much from them, their home, their safety, their peace. But it had also given them something greater. They were no longer three strangers bound only by chance. They were something more. A warrior, a mother and a child. Not just survivors. A family. And though the war still raged, though danger still hunted, they knew one truth. Together they were stronger than fear. The morning after the battle was quiet. Too quiet. The forest, usually alive with birds and insects, seemed to mourn the lives lost. Smoke from the burned shelter rose slowly into the sky, carrying with it the memories of the night before. Daniel lay against the roots of a tree, his arm bound tightly with cloth. His breathing was steady but shallow and his face pale. Lyra sat close, her eyes fixed on him. She had barely closed her eyes all night. She had feared the worst, but when the sun touched the trees and his chest still rose and fell, she felt a relief so deep she wept silently. Mira sat on his other side, holding his hand as though her small strength could keep him in the world. They had survived. But survival was not enough. The first challenge was shelter. With the old hut gone, they had nowhere safe to rest. Daniel, though weak, insisted on helping. When he tried to stand, his knees buckled. Lyra caught him, her arms steady though her heart trembled. "No," she said in her own tongue, shaking her head firmly. He did not understand the words, but he understood her meaning. For once, Daniel did not argue. He let her lower him back to the ground. So it was Lyra who gathered branches and Mira who carried stones. They worked together, building a new shelter not far from the ruins of the old one. It was smaller, simpler, but it stood strong. Daniel watched them, frustration on his face at being unable to help, but also something else, something softer. He had seen many families in his life, but none like this, two beings from another world, yet their care for him felt deeply human. Days passed. Daniel's wound slowly healed. Lyra changed the bandages often, cleaning them with boiled water. She had no training as a healer, but her hands were gentle and her patience endless. Each time she leaned close, Daniel caught the scent of her hair, like wildflowers and smoke. Each time her eyes met his, he saw gratitude, but also something unspoken, something growing stronger each day. Mira, too, refused to leave his side. She brought him water, offered him pieces of fruit, and told him long stories in her language, stories he could not understand but listened to anyway. Her laughter returned slowly, like the first light after storm clouds, but peace never lasted long in a broken world. One evening, while gathering food near the river, Daniel noticed fresh tracks. Heavy boots, too many. He crouched low, studying them. The raiders were not finished. They would return. That night he sat by the fire with Lyra and Mira. He looked at them, then at the forest beyond. He knew the truth. If they stayed, they would be found again. It was time to leave. The journey began at dawn. Daniel carried his rifle across his back, though his arm still ached. Lyra carried food and water wrapped in cloth. Mira clutched her small bag of treasures, stones, feathers, and the wooden figure Daniel had carved for her. They walked through valleys and across streams, always moving, always watching. Daniel led, scanning the land for danger. Lyra followed close, Mira between them. Though the path was hard, there was a strange comfort in their steps. They were no longer strangers forced together by chance. They were a unit, a family in all but name. At night, they sat close around the fire. Daniel sharpened his blade while Mira curled against her mother's lap. Sometimes Lyra sang in her soft voice, and though Daniel could not understand the words, the melody eased the weight on his heart. After many days of travel, they reached a high ridge. Below stretched a wide plain, dotted with trees and rivers. In the distance, faint smoke rose, not from raiders but from small scattered villages. Lyra gasped softly. She recognized the shapes of the huts. Her people, survivors. Mira clapped her hands, her eyes shining with hope. Daniel studied the sight carefully. It was not without danger, but it was safer than wandering alone. He turned to Lyra and nodded once. She understood. They made their way down. The villagers received them cautiously. At first they feared Daniel. His strange armor, his tall form, his human face marked him as an outsider. Warriors raised their spears. Mothers pulled their children close, but Lyra stepped forward. She spoke quickly in her language, her hands moving with passion. She told them of the battle, of how Daniel had fought, how he had saved not only her life but her daughter's too. She showed them the scars on his arm, the proof of his sacrifice. Slowly, the fear in the villagers' eyes turned to respect. They lowered their weapons. Children peeked curiously from behind their mothers. Daniel stood silent, not knowing the words, but he felt the shift. He had been a soldier all his life, often feared, often hated. But here, in this moment, he was seen for what he had done, not for what he was. Weeks passed in the village. Daniel helped where he could. He repaired walls, hunted food, trained young warriors in defense. Though the language barrier remained, actions spoke louder. Mira became the village's joy. Her laughter returned fully now, ringing like bells as she played with other children. She still clung to Daniel often, proudly showing the other kids the strong one who had saved her. Lyra, too, found peace. She worked with the other mothers, gathering food, weaving baskets, yet her heart was never far from Daniel. Each night when the stars shone above, she looked at him by the fire. She saw not just a protector, but something more, a man who had filled the emptiness left by war, who had given her daughter hope, who had given her heart strength again. One night, after Mira had fallen asleep, Lyra approached Daniel. She knelt by the fire, her hands folded nervously. He looked at her, sensing the weight in her eyes. She spoke slowly, choosing words carefully. Though he could not understand all, he caught pieces. She pointed to Mira, then to him, then placed her hand over her heart. Daniel frowned slightly, trying to piece it together. "You want?" he asked softly. She nodded. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. With trembling hands, she drew the shape of a family in the dirt. 3 figures holding hands. She touched one. Mira. She touched another. Lyra. Then she touched the third and looked at him. Daniel stared at the drawing. Then at her. For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then he reached out, his rough hand covering hers. His voice was low, steady. "Family," he said, her eyes shone like stars. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his in her people's gesture of deep bond. From that night on, something changed. They were not only survivors, not only companions. They were a family, chosen not by blood but by trust and love. Daniel no longer felt like a lost soldier wandering through ruins. He felt rooted, tied to something greater. Lyra no longer felt like a widow holding her daughter's hand in the dark. She felt hope again. Mira no longer felt like a child running from shadows. She felt safe, held by both a mother's arms and a father's strength. Seasons passed. The village grew stronger with Daniel's guidance. The raiders came again, but this time the people were ready. With Daniel's training, they fought back and won. When the battle ended, the villagers cheered. Children danced. Women sang, and Mira ran to Daniel, throwing her arms around him, shouting in her own tongue. "Daddy! Daddy!" Daniel froze, the words striking deep. He had never been called that before. Not in all his life. His throat tightened. Slowly he hugged her back, his strong arms holding her close. Lyra watched, tears sliding down her cheeks, her heart full. She whispered softly, "Yes, my child. He is your daddy, and mine too." The stars shone bright that night. Daniel sat with Lyra and Mira, their hands linked. For the first time in years, he felt no weight of war on his shoulders. He was not just a warrior anymore, he was something greater, a father, a partner, a man who had found home not in a place but in 2 hearts that had chosen him. And as the fire crackled and the night embraced them, he knew this truth: human or alien, war or peace, it did not matter. What mattered was family, and he would fight, live, and hope for them until his last breath.